Yes, okay. I'm going to call the meeting to order at 7:30 PM. Roll call, William Johnston.
Here.
Thomas Graffinino.
Here.
Lynn Colligan.
Here.
Lisa Kreckler.
Here.
And Phil DiOrio is here. Also present, we have Stephen Kiley, Town Attorney. First order of business is to review and approve the December 6, 2023 minutes. Do I have a motion to approve?
I'll make that motion. I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we have one application tonight at 16 Thomas Street, Anderson. Christina, will you read the notice?
A hearing on the application of Diane Anderson, the owner of 16 Thomas Street, Shelter Island, New York, which is Zone C, and is more specifically described on the Suffolk County Tax Map as 700-15-3-71. The applicants are seeking an area variance from Shelter Island Town Code, Section 133-10B5A, to maintain a storage building at a front yard setback of 27.7 feet, where 30 is required, thereby necessitating an area variance of 2 feet 5 inches. The correspondence received from Sam Wood, 23 Thomas Street, supporting the.
Mr. Chairman, I have to excuse myself because I worked on the project.
Thank you.
Did some work there.
Okay. Kim, I'm guessing you're here to present?
Yeah, yeah.
Please step up. State your name for the
My name
record.
is Kimberly Ray, Westervelt Ray in Shelter Island, on behalf of Diane Anderson. And I'll just hand up these notices, all the notices and the return receipt requested forms of
We got
entry.
it through the, yeah, already.
Oh, she sent it to you, good. And I believe the
No.
same with the affidavit of posting.
Yep,
Right.
everything else.
Okay, so this has a long history, 20-plus year history. And so I did something that I often do with my cases upstate, and that is that I prepared a narrative summary in support of the variance, but it basically summarizes the transactions over the past 20-plus years. And it's in the application form, but I'll just go through it. You all have an awful lot to read, so this application for a variance relief arises as a result of initially a letter of denial from the former building permits examiner, Lori Beard Raymond, to Ms. Anderson, and it was followed up by a letter of denial issued by the building department in 2022, which is we've supplemented the application with. And we're seeking variance relief of literally 2.7 feet from the front yard setback, 30 feet, to maintain the location of the Butler building that was built there, inadvertently constructed 2.7 feet inside the front yard setbacks more than 20 years ago. It was constructed by Mr. Anderson, Mrs. Anderson's late husband. In 2002, he sought and obtained a building permit for this work. And it later turned out that, again, this building was built inadvertently, no one meant to do this. 2.7 feet too close to the front of the road. So Mrs. Anderson wants to get a certificate of occupancy for the building. She's using it solely for the storage of her personal property and not for anything else. At one point, when she was renting it, she didn't realize that she was not permitted to rent it. She received notice from the building inspector and instantly deceased from that. She just didn't realize it couldn't be done. So they bought this property on May 6, 1983. And as I think many of you know, that Mr. Anderson operated a plumbing business here on Shelter Island, Anderson Plumbing and Heating. When they first bought this property, it's bounded by the house faces Thomas Street, this Butler building, and the remainder of the property is along Thomas Avenue, and it's in C zone. So building department did issue a building permit for construction of this building. It's a 24-foot by 36 prefabricated building. And it was erected on a new concrete slab foundation. And then it was wired for electricity, heating and air conditioning. And plumbing and sinks were installed. Mr. Anderson failed to timely obtain a certificate of occupancy, and the open building permit expired in 2004. So when notified of this, Mr. Anderson, who was then still alive, applied for a certificate of occupancy. He, in accordance with the building inspector's instructions, obtained an as-built survey by New York State licensed surveyor Nathan Taft Corwin III. And the revised survey dated March 29th, 2006, reflected the fact that 2.7 feet of the front of the building had been inadvertently constructed within the applicable 30-foot front yard setback. And again, this was a construction error that was entirely unintentional. But by the time the revised survey was submitted, the building was fully landscaped, in use. It was, the plantings around it and the driveway and everything was functional early on, but the landscaping really had taken off by that time. And it's really established at this point.
When you say it was in use at that time?
Yes.
In use, being rented to the electrical company?
No, I don't believe so. I think Mr. Anderson was using it
Oh, okay.
to house his business, storage and operating the business out of it, which is permitted under zoning. So Mr. Anderson was ill for a number of years. He suffered a very long series of major illnesses, including a stroke. And he was hospitalized for prolonged periods. And he was, on several occasions, had to stay in rehabilitative facilities on the south side, I believe. So Mrs. Anderson was very much consumed with taking care of him and really didn't have a chance to address this noncompliance. So fast forward to November 7th of 2018, Lori Beard Greenman's issued a letter of denial citing the encroachment, the 2.7-foot encroachment of the building. So Mrs. Anderson was trying to figure out what to do about this. And after Mr. Anderson's death and after her recovery, if you will, not only from his death, but the fallout from that, his having to close the plumbing business, she wanted very much to bring this building into compliance. So she, realizing that she needed to look, and at my suggestion, frankly, I said, you know, you really need to rule out all these alternatives before you say you just can't do this. You need to be able to say to the Zoning Board of Appeals why you can't do it. So she, excuse me, she sought an estimate from the Davis Company, which is a firm here on Long Island that moves buildings, to find out how much it would cost to move this building back 2.5 feet. So she obtained an estimate, and it's actually in the application package. And what's interesting in the estimate is what it doesn't cover. I think it's a $30,000 estimate, but the estimate specifies that that does not include it does not include demolition of the building, which would have to happen. It does not include breaking up the concrete slab, because that would then have to be moved back 2.5 feet. You just can't use that same slab. You've got to for a new one. So their estimate was for, I believe, pouring the slab and putting up a new building. So removal of the sink and related fixtures would be a part of this, and that's not covered by the Davis Company's estimate. I take it back, the repouring of the new concrete slab, 2.7 feet back out of the 30-foot setback is not part of Davis Company's estimate. After the slabs were broken up and a new slab poured, which was a huge undertaking, then the building would have to be reconstructed on a new concrete slab foundation. And the electrical and plumbing connections would have to be reconstructed, completely reconstructed. So these costs are completely prohibitive and completely out of Mrs. Anderson's ability to pay. And I must say, I think that what we're looking at here is moving a building 2.5 feet back, in a building that's been there for 20 plus years. A building which has been landscaped and is very unobtrusive. I don't know whether you all driven by there, but it really sits back in the landscape. The landscaping itself is beautiful. It's really pretty. There are many, many mature shrubs, many natives. Mrs. Anderson has gardens, flower gardens, and native gardens on the property that she tends very carefully. So I think she's done her due diligence, and I think that she does not have, she's a widow on a fixed income, and she just can't afford several factors of $30,000 to move this building back 2.5 feet. That seems infeasible. So I'm just here to ask you to please consider that the relief sought, or rather the building as it exists, it's not a change in the neighborhood. The building that was built is consistent with the zoning there. It's actually been very tastefully landscaped, and going in and taking it out will tear up the landscape, it'll tear up the property, it'll tear up the street. Construction will be just very disruptive to everyone. And I think we've explored whether or not this result could be reached, that is moving the building, or could be reached. I think that we've demonstrated that moving this building is just infeasible cost-wise, and for the benefit that you get for the costs that it would require of her. I just don't think there's any discernible benefit to the neighborhood to justify requiring that kind of construction project to move a Butler building back 2.5 feet from, by the way, a 30-foot front yard setback. We don't believe that the variance sought is substantial at all. 2.7 feet, the 30-foot front yard setback, I don't believe is substantial. Now, it is true that it goes the length of the building. That is true. But I still don't believe that the net effect of this constitutes a substantial variance. Certainly the impacts are not substantial, other than having to demolish it, rip out the slab, move it back 2.5 feet, and rebuild. We don't believe that this variance, if you grant this variance relief, that it will have an adverse impact or affect the physical or environmental condition of the neighborhood. It's been there for 20 years. The neighborhood zoning designations residential zone C, so the building is consistent with the zoning code as it is, other than setbacks. It would be a shame, I think, to tear up those gardens and to tear up the landscaping, which is really very attractive and helps hide the building, or maybe not hide it, but it certainly ameliorates the visual impact of the building. In terms of whether this variance relief is self-created, it is. It was inadvertent, certainly, but it's very definitely Mr. Anderson's inadvertence when he had this building built. certainly unintentional, however. So we think that the extreme financial hardship that requiring this building be pulled back 2.7 feet from the front of the street really doesn't justify that result, and we hope that you will grant this variance.
I've got a couple of questions for you. You mentioned 2.7 feet. It looks to me like it's, the variance needed varies from 1.3 feet to 2.3 feet because you're 28.7 from one corner and 27.7 from the other. So 27.7 leaves you 2.3 and it slides down to 1.3. I just want to get that on the
No,
record.
and I'm glad you brought that up. I've used the 2.7 as a conservative figure so that it wouldn't look like we were asking for more than we are entitled to. It's true, the survey does show it's varying. I mean, I think that shows partly how the inadvertence of this construction was. So yeah, it's actually, thank you for pointing that, it is less than 2.7 feet.
Do you have another question?
No, not right now.
What's the current use of the building?
Mrs. Anderson is just storing her personal property in it. It's strictly, it's just construction of her things, her personal things. It's not used for business in any way.
Anyone else? Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak on this application?
Yes, I,
Please, sir, state your name for the record.
Robert Nazararo.
Thank you.
I live right next to Diane Anderson on the south side of her house, and I had been there for 10 years. We have
Your house on Thomas Avenue?
her house is actually on, her house faces Thomas Avenue.
Yes, I understand that.
Yeah, that one faces Thomas.
And-
I'm 14, she's 60.
So you're on Thomas Avenue?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thomas Avenue. Okay. So when the Andersons had their plumbing build business there, I owned the house at the time with a friend of mine who has come here as well too. And we had to deal with the Andersons' disregard for decency of the neighbor. Their employees would throw their garbage on our property. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson would throw their yard debris onto the back of our property. And we also had to bring up to the building inspectors their blatant disregard for the town code under the lighting for the night sky ordinance, or the night skies, dark skies. They were excessively illuminating our property for years. And it didn't matter what we said to them or how we asked them nicely, change the direction of your lights. I would come home at 11 o'clock at night and there would be shadows in my backyard from the lighting that came from her buildings. Her house was so illuminated on the south side that I had light from her in my living room and in my kitchen. And it didn't matter to her, as she and her husband said, nobody is going to tell them what they're going to do with their property. Maybe Mr. Anderson unintentionally laid that slab wrong, but in my opinion, from having to deal with them, he put it where he wanted to and he didn't care. And he found out, I think it was in 2004, they got the denial letter. He had his medical difficulties much later than that. So all of that could have been addressed before all of this happened. She had two businesses that she was renting that place to, a plumbing and then an electrician. If she was concerned about getting money, and I understand, my father passed away, I had to help take care of my mother. I was spending $2,000 a week on aides to help my mother. I was watching money go through like crazy, but we still did the right thing. And they just didn't seem to really care what it was. And if this goes to changing where she can rent this commercially, I'm concerned as to what kind of business is going to be there. Because I had to deal with plumbing trucks, electrical trucks, garbage thrown on my property, plumbing supplies thrown onto my property and the back part of on their shed. I have no idea what's going to go there. You can have all sorts of traffic and it's just,
Can I just point out one thing?
yeah.
There is no application for obtaining some new commercial use for this property. The only thing in question here is the front yard setback variance. So there is nothing in front of us here where they're asking for some permission to run some sort of a non-owner occupied commercial operation from that building.
So this is only so she can store her own personal things in
Or
that
or to
building,
use it as however the town code allows.
because that's a residential area.
I understand, but C-zone, there are some things relative to, but it would have to be a home occupation, all right? And I don't see Mrs. Anderson getting into some sort of home occupation at this point in her life, but anything is possible, I guess. But in terms of her coming here to get permission to rent this place out to a commercial enterprise, that is not what this hearing is about at all. All right? I just want to make that clear, just because I know you have it,
Yeah,
think, but
Just
But
not-
the thing is, I just want to make sure that you understand that's not something that's here in front of us.
So this is really to just say the building should either stay where it is or the building needs to be taken down.
That's correct.
So I was not quite aware of all that.
Yeah, that's
was
why-
limited in that scope, because I'm looking, you're changing the zoning. so-
No, we're not changing any zoning. This
It's not a use variance.
So I guess in that respect, then that's probably pretty much what I do have to say, other than he acted as his own general contractor. So I'm sure he just did what he thought he wanted to do, and that was the end of it, because they have said repeatedly, nobody tells them what to do with their property. They're gonna do whatever they want.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else like to comment on this application? Anyone?
So I have a letter.
Please, will you state your name?
My name is Jean Merkel, and I live at 12 East Thomas Street, so I'm right across the street from Mrs. Anderson. So I just wanted to say this. As Diane Anderson's closest neighbor, I'd like to register my support for her request for a zoning variance for the building that was once used by her late husband's plumbing business. The variance is minuscule, less than 2.5 feet, and the cost of moving the building is prohibited. The landscaping around this building is marvelous, and Mrs. Anderson always takes good care of the building and grounds. And I love seeing her out there tending the beautiful gardens. The building fits into the character of the neighborhood, and uprooting it would create more chaos than good. I don't want to see my tax dollars spent making more hardship for a widow who's trying in good faith to remedy a mistake made by her late husband 20 years ago. And I just say that from the bottom of my heart as someone who was a widow, whose husband in Mattatuck left me with a house with no certificate of occupancy. And so I know what it's like to be going through this. And I know what it's like to care for an ailing husband, and how that creates a tremendous hardship where you just don't have time to deal with any other things, and this kind of thing. So let it go forward. It's such a small request. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to comment? No? Anybody here have any more questions, comments? All right, I'd like to, can I look at this? Here. I'd like to close the hearing and leave it open to written comments until January 10th in anticipation of our January 17th work session. Can I have a motion to close the hearing?
So move.
I'll second.
All in favor, let's do a roll call. Thomas Graffinino,
Yes.
Lynn Colligan.
Yes.
Lisa Kreckler.
Yes.
And Phil DiOrio votes yes. So the hearing is closed. We're going to leave this open to written correspondence until January 10th, and we'll discuss it at our January 17th work session. All right? Is there anything else? Any other business here? No? Can I have a motion to close the meeting?
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. Okay. Good night, everyone.
Good night.